Ainsley sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched Graham through the passenger window. He was standing beside the car, a few steps from the driver's door, his back half turned toward the rest-stop building. His phone was at his ear. He'd stepped out to take the call while she stayed inside, and in the first minute she hadn't thought anything of it. Then she heard his voice come through the car's speakers. The Bluetooth was still connected. She didn't reach for the volume dial. She didn't move at all. She sat very still while the heater ran quietly, and the gray November highway stretched out behind them, and Graham's voice filled the cabin as clearly as if he were sitting right beside her. Graham had asked something. She could tell from the pause before Graham answered. "It's complicated," Graham said. He shifted his weight and took a step further from the car. "She's great, she really is. But there's so much that comes with it. The little girl and Alma always being around, and Ainsley still, I don't know. She's still carrying everything from losing Patrick. She doesn't say it out loud, but it's there. Every time we go somewhere new she gets this look, like she's checking whether she's allowed to want things again." A pause. Ainsley watched a transport truck pull out of the lot. "I do love her." His voice dropped slightly. "I'm just not sure I signed up for all of it, the weight of it. I don't know if I can keep carrying this forever." She heard Graham say something she couldn't make out. Graham made a small sound, somewhere between agreement and exhaustion. Then he turned back toward the car and saw the Bluetooth indicator lit up on the dashboard. He went still for a moment. He ended the call. He stood there for a few seconds, then walked toward the building. When he came back, he had 2 coffees in a cardboard tray and a paper bag from the Tim Hortons inside. He got into the driver's seat and set everything between them without looking at her directly. "Double-double, right?" He held out her cup. "Right." She took it with both hands. He started the engine. The navigation app was still showing the route to his parents' house in Sterling. Another 40 minutes east on the 401. A recorded voice said to continue straight ahead. Ainsley watched the blue arrow for a moment. Then she said, "Can we go to the lake instead?" Graham looked at her. "The lake?" "Before it freezes, I want to see the water." She didn't look at him. "We can go to your parents next time." He was quiet, reading her face. She kept it still. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, we can do that." He made the turn at the next exit. Ainsley held her coffee with both hands and watched the road. And the nothing she was feeling told her everything she needed to know. She had not planned on coming back to Millhaven. After Patrick died, a fall at the construction site in February, the kind of morning that arrived in her memory as a sequence of disconnected facts, rather than a whole thing she could look at directly. After the funeral and the settlement that came out smaller than any of them had expected, after the meetings at the bank, where she kept asking the woman across the desk to slow down and repeat herself, after the afternoon in May where she sat in the driveway of their Kingston apartment building for 45 minutes while Ivy slept in her car seat, because Ainsley simply couldn't make herself walk inside. After all of that, she called her Aunt Alma. Alma had lived alone in Millhaven since her husband Gord passed 6 years earlier. She had the main floor bedroom and a spare room with a cedar wardrobe and a narrow window that looked out over the side yard. When Ainsley arrived with Ivy and 4 boxes and her portable sewing machine, Alma had the kettle on and didn't say a word about how long they might be staying. "I'll pay rent when I can," Ainsley said. "When you can," Alma agreed. "Sit down. Ivy, there's a tin on the counter with a moose on it and cookies inside." Millhaven was the kind of Ontario town that existed quietly between larger ones, pressed up against the north shore of the Bay of Quinte, with a main street of 8 businesses and a cenotaph the Legion repainted every 2 years. Ainsley had grown up there and left for Kingston at 20, the way most people left. Coming back felt like putting on a coat that still fit, but belonged to someone younger. She cleared out the spare room and set her sewing table near the window where the light was best. She started taking in alterations, a neighbor's bridesmaid dress, the hardware store owner's curtains, a funeral suit that needed the waist let out. She charged less than she should have and worked while Ivy slept, and tried not to look too far ahead. Ivy turned 5 in September and asked carefully, one more time, why Daddy wasn't coming home from work anymore. Ainsley answered her honestly, as she always did. Ivy was quiet for a while and then asked if there were cookies, which was its own kind of grace. Ainsley met Graham in October. He was at the Saturday farmers market, buying squash from an older woman who had kept a produce table at the same spot since before Ainsley had left for university. Ainsley was loading her canvas bag at the end of the row, when she misjudged the weight and the strap slipped from her shoulder. Apples rolled across the pavement. A jar of honey cracked against the ground. Graham was crouched beside her in 3 steps. "Honey's the only real casualty," he said, handing her an apple. She noticed he checked each one for bruising before he passed it over. He was a geography teacher at the high school, lived 2 streets away, had come to Millhaven 11 years ago for the job, and never quite got around to leaving. He did not ask about Patrick. He might not have known, or he might have chosen not to, and either way she was grateful. They talked about the market, and the woman who sold apple cider donuts from a folding table and always sold out before 9, and about Ivy pulling at Ainsley's sleeve, asking whether she could have one. "Can she?" Graham asked. Ainsley looked at her daughter. 1. Graham bought 3. He started coming around in November. There were reasons at first: a pattern he'd found that might suit her curtain project, extra firewood, a question about old plumbing he thought Alma might know the answer to. Alma answered the plumbing question with full seriousness, and then asked him to stay for dinner. He helped Ivy build a tower out of wooden blocks and let her knock it down 6 times in a row without losing patience. Ainsley noticed that from the kitchen, the way she noticed things she wasn't ready to put a name to yet. By December, he had stopped needing reasons. He showed up on Tuesday evenings and helped Alma with the recycling bins because the lids froze shut in the cold and Alma's wrists weren't what they used to be. He read to Ivy when Ainsley had alterations to finish. He sat at the kitchen table, marking geography quizzes while she sewed, and they talked without having to fill every quiet, which was more than she'd expected from anyone. She told him about Patrick in pieces. The accident first, because that was the factual part, the version that could be said in 1 sentence. Later, she told him about the afternoon in the driveway, which she'd never told anyone. He listened without trying to fix it. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," he said. "I know." She pushed a pin through the hem she was working on. "I just wanted to." In February, she found a library book on the bench outside the post office, the spine warped from the cold, a penciled name on the inside page that wasn't hers. She brought it home and read it in 4 sittings, and then couldn't find the 2nd volume anywhere. The library copy had been lost years ago. The one second-hand bookshop in town hadn't stocked it in a long time. She mentioned it to Graham once, not expecting anything to come of it. 3 weeks later, he set the 2nd volume on her sewing table without a word. She looked up. "Where did you find this?" "Church book sale in Desiranto. Drove out on a Saturday." He said it the way he said most things, like it hadn't cost him much. But Desiranto was 40 minutes in the wrong direction. She opened the cover. Every page was there. She thanked him the way she thanked people when the word was too small for what she meant. She looked at him long enough that he understood, and he nodded once and went back to his coffee. And she went back to her sewing, and neither of them made anything of it, which felt at the time like exactly the right thing to do. They had been together 7 months, not officially named, but understood by everyone in the way small towns understand things, when Graham suggested driving to Sterling to meet his parents. Ainsley said yes without hesitating. She packed a small bag. She chose her good gray sweater. She kissed Ivy's forehead and told her she'd be back by dinner and walked out to his car feeling something close to readiness. What she did not know until later, and only because she sat down and counted backward, was that Graham had been making small decisions on her behalf for at least 4 of those 7 months. In June, his school board had offered him a professional development placement in Ottawa for the fall. 3 months, a salary top-up, the kind of thing that went on a teacher's record. He had turned it down without telling her. She found out from Taryn, his closest colleague at the school, who mentioned it at a fundraiser in September, and then immediately looked sorry she had. Ainsley brought it up that evening. "I didn't want to stress you out," Graham said. "You could have told me. It wasn't a difficult decision. I didn't want to go." She let it rest. But she noticed she'd been left outside a door she hadn't known existed. In August, her sewing machine developed a grinding sound in the feed mechanism. Graham looked at it and offered to take it to someone he knew who repaired small appliances. She left it with him. 3 weeks passed. The person kept rescheduling. She had to turn down 2 alteration jobs because the portable machine couldn't handle the volume. She mentioned it to Graham twice, and both times he said he'd follow up. On the 4th week, she looked up repair services in Kingston herself, called 2 of them, chose the one with the clearest estimate, and booked a home visit. She paid for it from her business account. When Graham noticed the machine working again, his face went through something she couldn't fully read. "Why didn't you wait? I said I'd handle it." "You were busy. I needed it fixed. I was going to take care of it." "I know. I took care of it." He didn't say anything else, but the air in the room was different after that. Then there was the evening in September when she slipped. Alma was at a church committee meeting. Ivy was at school. Ainsley had been moving a heavy bolt of upholstery fabric from the storage shelf to the cutting table and misjudged the leverage. She went down hard on one knee and the fabric came with her. She spent 20 minutes on the workroom floor before she managed to get herself upright using the chair. Nothing was broken. Her knee ached for 3 days. She told Graham that evening. He went quiet in the way she had come to recognize, the precursor to a decision being formed without her input. "Maybe someone should be there in the mornings," he said. "I could come by before school. I don't need someone there in the mornings." "Ainsley." "I slipped. It happens." She looked at him evenly. "I need a step stool for that shelf. I'll order one." She ordered it that night and said nothing more about it. Graham came by the next morning anyway, with coffee. And she thanked him and didn't point out what she'd said. She had known by then that something was shifting between them. Not that he loved her less. She believed he loved her the same as always. But there was a weight accumulating in the space between them that neither of them was naming. And she had been hoping, the way people hope for things they suspect aren't coming, that he would eventually say it out loud. He didn't. She was still hoping at the rest stop outside Napanee on a gray November morning when the Bluetooth connected. And she heard him say it to his brother instead. At the lake, Graham parked on the gravel pull-off at the end of Horn Road. Ainsley had ridden her bicycle out to that spot as a teenager, and she still knew exactly how the water looked in November. Flat and pale, the far shore disappearing into cloud. They sat on the low concrete barrier with their coffees, and he talked about the ice forming differently in bay water than on inland lakes, about a unit he was redesigning for his grade 10s. She listened. She kept her cup warm between both hands and said yes, and I see, and nothing that led anywhere. He did not ask again why she'd changed the plan. The drive back was quiet in a way that felt like a held breath between two people who had agreed, without speaking, to wait. She waited a full week. She needed the words to find the right order before she could use them. It was after 8 on a Thursday. Ivy was asleep. Alma was in her room with the radio on low. Graham was at the kitchen table with his laptop, and Ainsley sat down across from him and said, "I heard the call." He looked up. At the rest stop, the Bluetooth was still connected. She kept her voice level, not cold, just steady. "I heard what you said to Bram." He set his hands flat on the table. He didn't deny it. That was one thing she would always be able to say about him. "I don't want you to apologize for being honest with your brother," she said. "I want you to know that I heard it, and that I understand more of it than you might think, and that I think we should stop here." "Ainsley," his voice was careful, "I was venting. That's not the whole picture. You meant enough of it." She looked at the table between them, then at him. "You've been making decisions for me for months. The Ottawa placement, the sewing machine. Coming by in the mornings after I asked you not to. You've been trying to carry things without talking about them. And I think it's because, somewhere in there, you're not sure you can keep doing this. And you haven't wanted to say it to me directly." He was quiet. "I've done the same," she said. "I've been hoping it would sort itself out. I think we've both been waiting for the other person to say something first, and neither of us did. I'm not trying to leave you." "I know. That's what makes it harder." She looked at him. "But loving someone and knowing you can build a life alongside them are two different things. You're not sure about the second part, and you've been hoping I wouldn't notice." She paused. "I noticed, Graham. I've been noticing for a while." He didn't answer, which was, in the end, its own kind of answer. "Go home," she said quietly. "Get some rest." He gathered his things slowly. At the door, he stopped with one hand on the frame. "I'm sorry I didn't say it to you first." "I know you are." She waited until his headlights turned out of the driveway. Then she sat at the table and listened to the house settle around her. Alma appeared in the hallway in her housecoat, not saying anything, just present in the particular way she'd been present through every hard thing. She put the kettle on without being asked. Ainsley didn't tell her to go back to bed. They drank tea and didn't talk much. Alma reached across the table at one point and pressed Ainsley's hand twice, which was the most Alma usually offered, and which was, that night, exactly enough. The first thing Ainsley did the following morning was fix her pricing list. She'd been undercharging for complex alterations for over a year. She raised 2 rates, wrote the new policy out clearly, and sent it to every current customer before she'd finished her first coffee. She lost 1 customer that week. She kept all the others. In January, she applied for a small business development grant through a provincial program. The Business Resource Center in Napanee helped her with the paperwork over 2 appointments. The application required her to project her income for the following year, which meant looking at numbers she'd been carefully avoiding. She looked at them. They held up. The grant came through in March. It covered a proper cutting table and a second sewing machine, which meant she could run 2 projects at once. She drove to Kingston to pick up the table from a shop that was closing, and she loaded it into the back of Alma's sedan herself, with Alma in the passenger seat providing steady direction. "A bit more to the left," Alma said. "I know." "The angle." "Alma. I'm only saying." Ainsley laughed. It surprised both of them, and then it surprised neither of them, and they drove home with the table secured in the back and the radio on. She enrolled in driving lessons in April with a retired teacher named Bert from Napanee, who was patient and specific, and treated her like someone who simply needed practice, not rescue. She'd had her license since 17, but had been letting Graham drive whenever they went anywhere together, and at some point, she'd stopped trusting herself on the highway, without being entirely sure when that had happened. By the 3rd lesson, she could merge onto the 401 without her hands tightening on the wheel. Ivy watched her come back from lessons with the evaluating look she'd developed that spring. "Did you go fast?" Ivy asked. "The right amount of fast," Ainsley said. "Can we go somewhere?" They went to the lake. Then they went to the library. Then, on a Saturday morning in May, they went to the farmer's market, and Ainsley parked the car herself, and Ivy held her hand, and the older woman at the produce table didn't comment on anything except the quality of her early strawberries. Millhaven's Canada Day fireworks happened the Sunday before the holiday, down at the waterfront park after dark. Ivy had seen the tents going up on Friday from the car window and spent the weekend asking about them in 20-minute intervals. Ainsley answered every question as fully as she could, which turned out to be quite fully. They walked down from Alma's just after 8. Ainsley, Ivy, and Alma in her good walking shoes and her refusal of assistance on every third uneven patch of ground. Ainsley carried a blanket and a thermos of hot chocolate. The park was already filling up, lawn chairs and families, and someone nearby who'd brought a dog that kept looking skyward with enormous apprehension. They found a dry patch near the waterfront railing and spread the blanket, and Ivy sat between Ainsley and Alma and wrapped both hands around her cup and watched the water go dark. When the first one went up, Ivy grabbed Ainsley's arm. "Mom," she said with full seriousness. "I see it, Bug. It's so big. It really is." Ainsley watched the light spread across the bay. She thought about the 3 things she had once told Graham she wanted, said out loud one evening, when they'd been talking about what a person would do if they could start somewhere new. She wanted to see the fireworks from the waterfront the way she had as a child. She wanted a workspace that was genuinely hers. She wanted to be able to drive herself wherever she needed to go, without thinking twice about it. He had nodded and said he'd make sure she got there. He had meant it. He had meant it in a way that required him to be present when it happened. She understood now that waiting for someone else to be present was not the same thing as having the thing itself. The next burst went up in green and white, and Ivy made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Even Alma leaned forward a little at the big ones. Ainsley poured more hot chocolate into Ivy's cup and watched her daughter's face in the reflected light. The way it moved through wonder and disbelief, and pure uncomplicated joy, as though she hadn't yet learned that things this good were supposed to be rationed. The corner of the blanket was slightly damp. The dog nearby had barked twice and then given up and put its head down. Her shoulder was pressed against Alma's. Ivy was narrating every explosion in real time, in case Ainsley might somehow miss one. This was what it looked like, Ainsley thought. When you stopped organizing your life around a door, you were waiting for someone else to open. It looked like a damp blanket and good company, and her daughter saying, "Mom, look, look, Mom, look," and the bay going all the way out to the dark. She looked. Later that autumn, Ainsley set up a small table at a community book sale in town. She laid out a selection of used titles and a handwritten card offering alterations and consignment services. Near the end of the afternoon, a woman stopped and picked up a novel and turned it over in her hands. "What would you give someone who's trying to figure out what comes next?" she asked. Ainsley thought about it honestly. "Something that takes a while to get started," she said, "but doesn't let go once it does." The woman bought the book. After she left, Ainsley straightened the remaining titles and looked out at the street. The maples were past their peak, the red already giving way to rust. Ivy would be home from school in an hour. Alma had the car this afternoon, so Ainsley had walked here and would walk back. She had not once thought to ask anyone's permission to do it. She hadn't thought about it at all. And that absence of thought, that ordinary, quiet, completely unremarkable freedom, was the thing she hadn't known she'd been missing until she had it back. She packed up her table and walked home through the October afternoon, and the light came through the trees the way it does in that part of Ontario in fall. Low and golden, and entirely indifferent, and she walked through it anyway.